My name is Allison, 36 years old, living with my little daughter Ruby in a quiet small town in North Carolina. I work the night shift as an emergency room nurse, used to blood, alarms, and life or death moments. But nothing could have prepared me for that one moment, when I had just brought Ruby home from the hospital after a severe asthma attack. I hadn't even taken off my coat when my mother blocked the doorway, her eyes cold as steel, and barked, "Pay rent for your sister. No. Or get out." I said no. And the next second my father landed a slap straight across my face. Blood filled my mouth. Ruby screamed. They didn't care. All they wanted was for me to bow my head. Have you ever been treated by your own family like nothing more than a tool for their convenience? If this story tightens something in your chest, leave a comment. Tap like if you've ever been hurt by those closest to you. And don't forget to subscribe, because what I'm about to share might make you question how a family could ever do this to their own daughter. I'm the oldest of 3 sisters. My parents always claimed they loved us equally, but every moment of my childhood proved otherwise. Brooke, the middle child, was the golden girl. She had everything: her own room with rose wallpaper, new dresses every school year, expensive birthday gifts, and private weekend outings with our parents. Me. I was the eldest, the one expected to be responsible, to give in, to know how to sacrifice. I was a strong student. No one could deny that. In 12th grade, I won a full scholarship to a top medical university in another state. I thought that was my way out of the silent dinners and disapproving stares every time I failed to act like the perfect big sister. But just before I was set to leave, my mother sat at the edge of my bed, placed her hand on my shoulder, and said, "You're the oldest. You can't go. Brooke's still young. We're working all the time. Who's going to take care of the house? Of your sister." I stayed quiet. I've stayed quiet many times in my life, because in our house, silence meant submission. I didn't go to college. I stayed behind, cooked meals, did laundry, took Brooke to school, and soothed the youngest whenever mom snapped. I kept telling myself, just temporary. A few years. Then I'll go back. But Brooke grew up and I just got older, working part-time at a bakery, staying up with a feverish child, fading into the background of a family that never really saw me. Then I met Jonathan. He was a regular at the bakery, always came in late afternoons, ordered a slice of apple pie and a cup of black tea. Jonathan was gentle, warm-smiled, and a good listener. When I became pregnant with Ruby, I thought I'd finally found a way out. But just weeks after she was born, when I was still battling back pain and barely sleeping, Jonathan left. No goodbye. Just a piece of paper with 3 handwritten lines. "I'm not ready to be a father. You're strong, you'll be okay." I brought Ruby back to the house I'd once longed to escape. My mother opened the door, glanced at the baby, then turned away. "You can stay for now. Don't expect comfort." I nodded. I always nodded when I had no other choice. Ruby was 3 weeks old when I started working night shifts at the local ER. The first nights leaving her alone with my mother were the nights I cried in the locker room, quietly behind the scrubs. I knew mom wouldn't hit her, but she wouldn't hold her either. Wouldn't soothe her when she cried. She'd leave Ruby lying in the crib, turn her back as if the baby were just another burden. I told myself, just a few months. I'd save up, rent a small apartment, and the 2 of us would finally breathe. But then came the medical bills, the formula, the medications, and Brooke's car repair, her college tuition. My parents never directly demanded, but they left heavy remarks everywhere. "Brooke is this family's future. She has to graduate with a real degree. And you already have a kid. Your life's settled now." I sent money like it was my duty. I didn't want Brooke to fail. I didn't want mom calling me selfish. Every time I was late sending cash, the house felt like a wire pulled tight. Mom slammed brooms, kicked doors, screamed that I was a freeloader. Frank, the silent father, only spoke when I pushed back, and when he did, his voice was thunder, and his hand, I still remember, was like stone. I tried looking for another place once. There was a discounted apartment near the hospital for healthcare staff. When I told them, mom threw her phone across the table. Dad stood up, walked into the yard, said nothing. Brooke cried, called me a traitor. That night, Ruby had a fever. I sat up beside her, my chest tight like stones pressing down. The next morning, I canceled the lease. During my ER shifts, I treated jumpers, hemorrhages, crashes. But coming home, I was the one who needed saving. I stopped talking about myself. Stopped expressing anything. I lost touch with friends. Coworkers who used to ask eventually stopped. worn down by my constant, I have to go home to the baby. Ruby grew up in a house with silent dinners, a bitter grandmother, a mother always exhausted, and a grandfather who never looked at her kindly. She often sat alone on the couch, hugging her teddy bear named Marshmallow, listening to me read bedtime stories with a hoarse voice after long shifts. One night she whispered, "Mommy, why is our house always sad?" I didn't know what to say. I just hugged her tight. Things had been cracking inside me for years. But I kept patching it up. I thought if I just tried harder, everything would settle. If I sacrificed enough, they'd see me. They'd love me. They'd call me daughter, sister, mother, with real warmth. I was wrong. Deeply wrong. That slap, and Ruby's eyes afterward, ripped through the shell I'd lived in for 36 years. I sat on the floor for a long time after that hit, hand over my face, the taste of blood and tears on my tongue. Ruby was only a few feet away, but I couldn't look at her. I was afraid of her eyes. Afraid to see what I had tried so long to deny, that I'd raised my daughter in a place that was never safe. She didn't cry loud. She just stood there wide-eyed, then walked quietly to her little desk, pulled out a sheet of paper and crayons. I had never seen her hands shake like that. Each line she drew was slow, heavy, as if every stroke carved deeper into what had just happened. I leaned back into the couch, eyes closed to keep tears from falling. But Ruby's soft voice pulled me back. "Mom," she slid the paper to me. I picked it up. It was a crayon drawing, childlike yet eerily detailed. A woman lying on the floor, blood from her mouth. A teddy bear nearby. A little girl in the corner, tears falling. The room in the drawing was our living room. The brown shag rug, the clock on the wall that hadn't ticked in years. I said nothing. Just held the picture to my chest, shame burning through my bones. That 7-year-old didn't need anyone to tell her what happened was wrong. He felt it. Neither of us slept that night. Ruby turned to the wall, hugging Marshmallow, curled up like a kitten searching for warmth. I sat in the kitchen, the yellow light spilling onto a forgotten calendar. My phone buzzed. A message from Brooke. "Stop being selfish. If you don't help, Mom and Dad will lose the house. You're the oldest. It's your responsibility." Another from Frank. "You owe this family. You've lived because of us. Don't forget that." I sat still, then hit record. I began saving every call, every voicemail, every forced money request, every vague threat I'd once deleted without thinking. 3 days later, Lydia, the neighbor across the street, sent me a video. Her message was simple. "Do you need help?" I hesitated before hitting play. The video showed me standing across from Frank. Joanne's voice in the background. Then the slap. I fell. Ruby screamed. The footage shook. Maybe Lydia's hand trembled while filming from her window. I watched it 5 times that night. Each time my chest tightened. Not because of the slap. Not because of the blood. But because of Ruby's face, wide-eyed, tear-streaked, clutching air where Marshmallow had slipped away. That look was an unspoken verdict aimed at me. I made a folder on my phone. I named it "For Ruby." Inside, I saved all the audio, screenshots, Lydia's video, and old pictures, like the bruise I once covered with makeup. A wrist mark from when Frank yanked my purse. A cut on my lip from when Joanne shattered a glass. I used to think those things didn't count. Now I saw them for what they were. A pattern of control woven into my life. The next morning, while Ruby ate breakfast, I gently placed her drawing on the fridge door, held by a small magnet. She looked at me, said nothing, then slowly nodded. In that gaze was a silent agreement, as if she knew something had just begun. Joanne passed by the kitchen, glanced at the picture. She raised an eyebrow. "Trying to humiliate someone, are we?" she sneered. I didn't answer. I just stood there holding my coffee cup, eyes locked on hers. She huffed and walked away, but I saw hesitation in her. From that moment on, I no longer felt like a victim. I was still afraid, still flinched whenever a door slammed. But something inside me had started to stir. A part of me I'd buried so deep I almost forgot it existed. Courage. And I started thinking about the word resist. Not in hope that they would change, but to protect myself, to protect Ruby. No more silence. No more giving in. No more letting them believe I was there to be used, controlled, and insulted as some sort of blood-bound duty. I don't know why I went up to the attic that morning. Maybe to find the old photo box Ruby had asked about. Maybe because I'd dreamt of my grandfather the night before, standing in the backyard with his faded straw hat, eyes stern but kind like when I was a child. In the dream, he said only one sentence: "It's time for you to see." The attic was covered in dust. The smell of damp wood mixed with old paper stung my nose. I sifted through each box, each album. Then, tucked behind a broken fan and some mildewed curtains, I found a small metal box, its lock rusted. A faded sticky note was taped to the lid, handwriting barely legible: "For Allison." My heart skipped a beat. I carried the box downstairs, sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling as I opened it. Inside was a bundle of papers wrapped carefully in a plastic sleeve. An old savings book, a few letters my grandfather had written to me when I was little, a stack of black and white photos. And at the bottom, a worn-out folder labeled in blue ink: "Property title transfer, Allison M. Rivers." I froze. Page after page, there it was. A handwritten will signed by my grandfather 20 years ago, notarized by a local attorney. The very house I'd been living in, the one where I was treated like a freeloader, had been transferred to me when I was 16. In his letter, my grandfather wrote, "This home is for Allison, because she's the only one in this family who truly understands the value of shelter." I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. It wasn't a dream. My name was there. My grandfather's signature. The notary seal still intact. The deed had never been updated, never altered. I was the legal owner of this house. Not Frank. Not Joanne. Certainly not Brooke. I leaned back in the chair, hands trembling. Not from joy. From shock. How could I have lived all these years in a home I legally owned and not known it? How could I have believed I needed their permission to stay? I had endured so many times being called a burden, a long-term liability. But it turned out they were the ones living off me. I thought of Ruby. Of the way her eyes widened every time her grandmother raised her voice, or her grandfather passed without even glancing at her. I thought of her drawing, of the nights she woke crying out my name. This house had never been a safe haven. But it was the only thing we had. And now, it belonged to me, in every legal sense, no longer just a dream. I called the notary office to verify the documents. The clerk pulled the record and confirmed, "Yes, the file is still valid. Your name remains the officially recorded owner. If anyone else is staying there without a legal agreement, you have the right to ask them to leave." I thanked her and hung up. My fingers clenched the folder like I feared it might vanish. That evening, as I fed Ruby her soup, Joanne walked into the kitchen, glancing at the folder on the table. She raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" she asked. Without looking at her, I replied softly, "Property documents." She paused a moment. "For what?" "That house is in your father's name." I turned to her. "No. It's in mine. Since 20 years ago. Left to me by Grandpa." Joanne froze but quickly scoffed. "Who filled your head with that nonsense? You think a few old papers mean you get to kick your parents out?" I didn't answer. I stood, opened a drawer, took out my phone and showed her photos of each notarized page, every signature, every seal. I held the screen up to her face. Joan stared for a while. Her eyes narrowed. Her lips pressed tight. This is really from him?" she asked, her voice lower. I nodded. "He left it to me. Not to you. And definitely not so you could use it to force me to raise my sister or cover your debts." Frank walked in right then. Seeing our standoff, he scowled. "What's going on here?" Joanne didn't answer. She handed him my phone. He scrolled through the photos, his face slowly draining of color. "How did you get this?" "I found it in a box Grandpa left for me. It was mine all along. You both knew. You just never told me." Joanne clenched her fists. "We didn't tell you because we didn't want you screwing everything up. A single woman with a house in her name? Who'd respect that? Who'd marry you?" Frank growled. "You haven't exactly amounted to much. Got knocked up and dumped. We took you in. Isn't that enough?" I stared him down. "No. You've been living off me. Who paid Brooke's college tuition? Who pays for Mom's daily car rides and insurance? Who buys the groceries, the utilities? Who?" Silence. I took a deep breath. Not to calm down, but to brace myself. Because I knew the worst storm hadn't hit yet. But I wasn't running. And I wasn't alone. I had the truth. I had Ruby. And I had all the years behind me that had forged steel from what they thought was just mud. That night after dinner, Ruby had a severe coughing fit. I checked her inhaler. It was almost empty. Outside it was drizzling, but I had no choice. Leaving her alone was always my last resort, but I knew I needed just 15 minutes. Run to the pharmacy 3 blocks away, grab the meds, and come right back. Ruby hugged Marshmallow tight, curled up on the couch. I told her to lock the door behind me and keep the phone close. She nodded, eyes red and wheezing. I drove through the rain, nerves stretched thin. At the pharmacy, I picked up her prescription and grabbed some milk and bread for the weekend. When I returned, what stopped me wasn't the dim light in the kitchen, but the wide-open front door. I dropped the bag on the porch, heart pounding out of my chest. Inside, the living room lights were on, but the space looked like it had been ransacked. Drawers open, my wallet emptied on the table, underwear scattered on the floor. On the kitchen counter, my small jewelry box lay open. The necklace my mother used to wear when she was young was now stuffed into her coat pocket hanging by the door. I saw my mother, Joanne, standing by the window, trembling, holding my wallet. Frank was crouched under the couch like he was looking for something. Ruby sat curled up in the corner, eyes wide with fear. I rushed to her, pulling her into my arms, then turned sharply. "What are you doing?" I shouted, my voice choking in my throat. Joanne turned, startled, but only for a moment. She clutched her chest and grimaced. She attacked me. The kid had a fit and shoved me. My chest. "Frank, call 911. I stood frozen. Before I could react, Frank was already reaching for his phone. I took a step toward them, and my mother suddenly collapsed, moaning, gripping the arm of the chair like she was about to faint. Ruby burst into tears. "Mommy!" Frank shouted into the phone, "We need an ambulance. My daughter attacked her mother. She can't breathe." I just stood there, holding Ruby close, my mind pricked by 1,000 invisible needles. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. But they were so used to scripting scenes. So skilled at playing the victim. And I was the difficult daughter, the stubborn one, the one who'd had emotional issues after the divorce. They knew how easily society would believe that. When the police arrived, I was asked to stand away from Joanne. A young officer approached me, eyes cautious. "We received a report of domestic violence. Do you have anything you'd like to say?" I nodded, my voice slightly trembling. "Yes. But before I say anything, please check the doorbell camera at Ms. Lydia's house across the street. She has a camera pointed at my front door." The officer looked surprised but didn't dismiss it. They separated me to speak privately, while another officer went across the street and knocked on Lydia's door. I saw Lydia peek out, then quickly open the door wider, phone in hand. She showed them something on the screen. I waited, heart pounding. My mother was still lying on the floor, moaning dramatically. Frank kept repeating, "I told you, she has a temper. She's unstable." About 10 minutes later, the officer came back to me, face serious. He nodded slowly. "We reviewed the footage from across the street. There was no sign of violence from you. In fact, it appears Joanne staged the scene. We'll need her medically evaluated, but after that we'll proceed with an investigation for unlawful entry and possible theft." I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. Ruby clung to me, her face still streaked with tears. Joanne sat up abruptly at the officer's words. "What are you talking about? I'm her mother. I have a right to enter my child's house." "This house is in my name," I said, voice steady. "You knew that. No one has the right to ransack my belongings or my daughter's." Frank opened his mouth to argue, but the officer cut him off. "Please cooperate. This is no longer a private family matter. There are indications of criminal activity." Joanne was lifted onto the stretcher, her eyes burning holes through me. Frank walked beside her, silent. As the ambulance rolled away down the street, I stood on the porch holding Ruby. The rain was still falling in a light mist, but I didn't feel cold anymore. Inside me, a different storm was starting to pass. Not because I'd won, but because I had finally spoken the truth. The next morning, I took Ruby to school like usual. She didn't say much, just held my hand tighter as she stepped out of the car. I knelt down, adjusted her hood, and whispered, "You'll be okay. I promise." She gave a small nod, then ran into class, Marshmallow peeking out of her backpack like a tiny flag waving goodbye. I sat in the car for a long time, forehead resting on the steering wheel, listening to the rain tick against the windshield. Part of me wanted to start the engine and drive anywhere that felt far from all of this. But the other part of me wouldn't let me run anymore. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to an old contact, Gerald Whitman, a man I'd cared for after open heart surgery 3 years ago. Now the county sheriff. He had always been kind, formal, always calling me Nurse Angel. I never thought I'd call him outside of work. But now I couldn't think of anyone more trustworthy. The call lasted only a few minutes. I gave him a summary of what had happened, my voice steady even to my own surprise. Gerald listened closely, then said calmly, "You don't have to endure this another day. Send me copies of the homeownership documents and any supporting evidence. I'll arrange legal support." I sent the email as soon as I got home, attaching the footage from Lydia, photos of the deed, pictures I'd taken of past injuries, and threatening messages from Joanne, Frank, and even Brooke, the golden sister who had never lived a day in this house but acted like it was shared property. An hour later, Gerald called back. "I've reviewed everything. This isn't a family spat anymore. This is unlawful entry, theft, and evidence of prolonged psychological abuse. I'm bringing in the county attorney and a local judge. Are you ready for the next step?" I gripped the phone. "I'm ready." That afternoon, I sat in the office of my personal attorney, Angela Tran, a sharp, composed Vietnamese-American woman in her 40s. She went over every document I'd brought, nodding as she flipped each page. Then she said, "I'll file an emergency restraining order today. In parallel, I'll draft a motion to formally evict Joanne, Frank, and Brooke from the property under rightful ownership." I sat there, hands clasped, trying to calm the storm inside me. Angela looked up after a moment and said gently, "Do you realize how brave you are?" I gave a dry laugh. "I don't feel brave." "That's okay," she replied. "We'll take care of the legal side. You just keep protecting your daughter." By dusk, I got a message from Gerald. "Restraining order approved by the court. Effective immediately. Official notice will be served tomorrow morning. Officers will be present to ensure safety." I sat quietly by the living room window, watching the golden light stretch across the damp lawn. Ruby lay curled up on the sofa, Marshmallow wrapped in a towel like he'd been through a storm himself. And it hit me, the house had long since stopped feeling like a safe place. But today I felt like I was reclaiming it, one piece at a time. That night, I printed the restraining order, sealed it in a waterproof sleeve and placed it by the door. Not as a show of force. As a reminder to myself, every insult, every act of violence, every shame, stops here. No one crosses this threshold again unless I allow it. When I tucked Ruby into bed, she held my hand. "Mom, are Grandma and Grandpa coming back?" I looked into her eyes. "They'll never be allowed to hurt us again." She stared at me for a long moment, then gave a small nod. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, Marshmallow tucked under her cheek, and soon her breathing softened into sleep. I sat beside her, still holding her hand. I wasn't completely calm yet, but I wasn't afraid. I didn't flinch at every sound. I didn't brace for the slamming door or steel myself for what came after. This house wasn't a cage anymore. It was becoming exactly what my grandfather wrote in his letter. A place for my granddaughter to know she has worth. A place to begin again. That morning was crisp, the air laced with the smell of fallen leaves and leftover rain. I zipped up my thick coat, packed the documents into my bag, and helped Ruby fasten her jacket. She looked up at me, eyes uncertain. "Mom, is today the day they leave?" I nodded softly. "Yes, sweetheart. I'll be right here. You just wait in the car, okay?" Ruby clutched Marshmallow, then climbed into the back seat, her eyes fixed on me through the window. Out front, the police car was already parked. 2 officers stood nearby, one of whom I recognized as Lieutenant Mitchell. I'd cared for him years ago when he fractured his hip. He nodded at me with understanding in his eyes. I walked over and handed him the official restraining and eviction orders from the county court. Mitchell reviewed them, then gave a small nod. Joanne and Frank were standing on the front steps, faces pale, as if they still couldn't believe this was really happening. Brooke stepped out of the house with a small overnight bag, looking reluctant. None of them looked at me. No one spoke. They knew. They just never thought I'd take it this far. I stood tall, my voice steady. "I'm requesting the 3 of you vacate the premises immediately in accordance with the court order. Any resistance will be treated as a criminal offense." Joanne let out a sharp, mocking laugh, then dropped to her knees on the stone steps, sobbing theatrically. You're throwing your own mother out on the street. God. I carried her, raised her, and now she tosses her mother out like garbage. Frank clenched his fists, his face flushed red, then suddenly lunged toward me, swinging his arm as if to snatch the paper I was holding. But Lieutenant Mitchell was faster. He stepped in, blocking Frank with a firm hand pressed to his chest. Mr. Frank, I suggest you calm down. Any violent behavior will lead to immediate arrest. Frank stepped back, but the fury in his eyes didn't fade. She's my daughter. You think you can drag the whole police department here without consequences? I looked him square in the eye. I didn't bring the police. You left me no other choice. The sound of murmuring began to spread from the sidewalk. Neighbors had started to gather across the street beneath the shedding maple trees. Lydia stood closest, arms crossed, giving me a slight nod when our eyes met. A few others I recognized only by face, never having spoken with them, were there too. No one said a word, but everyone was watching. Joanne was still slumped on the steps, one hand clutching her chest, the other pointing at me. She made it all up. I have a heart condition. I was just trying to teach her right and she called the cops. What kind of mother doesn't worry about her own child? I didn't answer. The wind carried her cries, tangled in half-truths and theater. Frank retreated to the yard, kicked a brick step hard, then slumped down on the bench. Brooke remained still, silent, head bowed as she shoved her phone into her coat pocket. I turned toward the car, intending to check on Ruby, but saw that she had already stepped out. I was about to stop her, but she had already walked over, standing beside me, marshmallow in her arms. The whole neighborhood fell silent. Ruby tilted her head up, looked directly at Frank, and spoke, her voice clear but slightly trembling. You hit my mom. Frank froze. Joanne lifted her face, eyes wide open. Brooke inhaled sharply, the sound cutting through the air. Everyone fell into absolute silence. No car engines, no birds chirping in the distance. That one sentence, plain, without bitterness, cut through every excuse like a blade. Ruby turned to me and gripped my hand tightly. I bent down and gently squeezed her hand back. There was nothing else to say. No one needed to say anything. Joanne slowly sat upright, wiping her tears clumsily but no longer crying out. Frank stood abruptly, glancing around at all the eyes watching him, then turned away without a word. Brooke exhaled hard and trudged to the car, sliding into the back seat without looking back. Lieutenant Mitchell gave a gentle nod, signaling them to start moving. Then he turned to me, his voice low just for me to hear. You just did something most people in this town never dared to. And you're not alone. I nodded, a heavy weight lifting from my chest. Ruby pressed against me, her eyes no longer filled with fear. There was something else now, something like confidence. Each step they took away from the porch, each shadow that passed me, none of them looked back. No more pity. No more deceit. No one left who could use the word family to justify cruelty. Our new apartment was in a quiet neighborhood, just a 10-minute walk from Ruby's school. Not big, not fancy, but filled with light. The walls were cream-colored, the old hardwood floors had a few scratches but were clean, and the tiny balcony was just enough space for 2 lavender pots Ruby picked out during our first week there. We moved in on a mild Saturday morning, the maple tree outside our window already shedding golden leaves. That night, Ruby slept straight from 9 p.m. until morning. No panic attacks, no nightmares, no waking up to search for marshmallow. I sat at the edge of her bed watching her sleep, my heart light for the first time in what felt like years, like someone had finally lifted a heavy backpack I'd carried for far too long. I realized that sometimes, a quiet room is all it takes to start healing a child's soul. Ruby began drawing again. But the pictures didn't show a mother on the floor with red scribbles of blood. Instead, they showed the two of us in a garden full of flowers, marshmallow drawn with care, wearing a red ribbon, and above us, a round, smiling sun. One drawing she taped on the fridge. 2 people standing in front of a small apartment, under big purple crayon letters that read, Our Home. I started therapy every Monday morning after dropping Ruby off at school. The office was on the 3rd floor of an old building downtown, with frosted glass that read, Nancy Whitmore, Mental Health Counselor. She was in her 60s with soft silver hair and a calm voice that didn't shy away from truth. Her room smelled of peppermint tea and pine wood. I sat on a velvet green chair and began learning how to name what I had been through. I'm not crazy, I said in our first session. I just thought that if I was good enough, they'd love me. Nancy tilted her head gently, her eyes soft. And now, I think, real love doesn't come with forced obedience. She nodded. That's something many people take a lifetime to understand. I started recognizing guilt not because it was valid but because I had been trained to feel it. Each time I felt anxious about saying no, I wrote down, my needs matter too. Each time I was tempted to call Brooke to explain or apologize for something that wasn't my fault, I added, no one has the right to keep me in a loop of pain. On free afternoons, I reviewed old coursework. I enrolled in refresher classes to pursue an advanced nursing certification. The school was only 2 blocks away, the classrooms small, filled with students of all ages, from women in their 20s to other moms like me. On the first day, walking in felt like being 18 again, holding a scholarship I never got to use. But no one could stop me. Ruby often waited for me to come home so we could eat dinner together. We took turns telling stories about school and our latest lessons. One evening she asked, Mom, are you studying to become a doctor? I laughed. Not quite, but I'm learning how to take better care of people, including myself. She nodded thoughtfully, then said something that nearly made me choke up. So you're learning to love you too, right? I couldn't answer. I just pulled her close and held her tight. Ruby was starting to understand. And so was I. On weekends, we strolled to the little park nearby. Ruby brought marshmallow in her crayon box while I brought my textbooks, or just sat quietly watching her run around. There were no more screams behind us. No more judgmental stares. No more feeling like a burden in a house with my own name on the deed. We were learning to slow down, day by day, like 2 small trees finally lifted from rotting soil and searching for sunlight. In the mornings, I cooked real breakfast. At night, I read Ruby stories in a steady voice, no longer choked by tears. One night, as she yawned and stretched, she mumbled, I really like our new home. I can sleep without marshmallow standing guard now. I looked at her, the nightlight casting a soft orange glow on her cheek. I whispered back, that's because now you know I'll always be here. I didn't know what the future would look like. But I knew this much. This tiny apartment with just 2 rooms and a narrow balcony had given Ruby and me something we had never truly had, a place we could call home. No conditions. No one above us. No one waiting for us to collapse so they could climb over us. Just me, my daughter, and the mornings that were finally warming behind our window. Then came the call from Angela Tran's office on a Tuesday morning, right as I was prepping for my final nursing exam. Her voice was calm but precise, like every word had been weighed. Allison, the court has accepted the criminal charges against Joanne and Frank. They're being investigated for 3 main offenses: property seizure, theft of personal belongings, and forgery of a citizen's signature. I tightened my grip on the pen in my hand, not out of fear but because some part of me still couldn't believe it was truly happening. I used to think cases like these only existed in newspapers, in movies, in stories people read and moved on from. But no. This was my story. And justice was finally walking in the right direction. Angela continued, the video from Lydia, the property ownership documents, the bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals from your joint account. Everything is valid. The court has issued summonses. I thanked her, then hung up the phone and sat in silence for a moment in the empty classroom. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a long beam across the tiled floor. My heart felt calm like still water. Not because I wished them pain, but because I finally knew I wasn't silent anymore. News about the lawsuit spread quickly. I didn't post anything on social media, but one day Lydia called and told me to turn on the TV. A short feature on the local news channel replayed a snippet from the interview I had once hesitated to accept. There I was, on screen, sitting in our little apartment. Nothing fancy, no professional lighting, just the soft glow of morning light and the sound of Ruby giggling from the bedroom. The reporter spoke gently. A quiet but profound story. The hidden abuse inside a family. Allison Rivers, a nurse and single mother, walked through years of control and exploitation, and finally found her voice. I didn't finish watching. I turned off the TV when Ruby's drawing appeared. The purple sun, the 2 of us holding hands. I didn't want her to hear any of it through a television broadcast. She had lived enough of it already. But the broadcast didn't end there. A week later, I received an email from the local single mothers support fund. The sender was Mrs. Marlene James, the organization's director. "We saw your story," she wrote, "and we believe your voice could bring hope to hundreds of women who are suffering silently. If you're willing, we would like to invite you to speak at next month's forum." I spent a night thinking it over. Then I replied, "I'm not good at speaking in front of a crowd. But if it helps someone else avoid what I went through, I'll try." Meanwhile, Brooke reappeared, not with an apology but with a string of frantic emails. The cosmetics business she'd founded with family loans, most of which were quietly siphoned from the mortgage on the house under my name, was collapsing. A supplier was suing her for missed deliveries. Investors were pulling out. She wrote, "I know you don't owe me anything, but please, tell the bank you'll help cover the debt in installments." I didn't reply. Angela advised me to forward everything to the attorney handling the forged loan documents. My name wasn't on the contract, but the digital signature faked as mine was. Everything was becoming clear layer by layer. There was nothing left to hide. Joanne and Frank remained completely silent. No texts, no emails. From what I was told, they had hired separate attorneys but didn't dispute the ownership of the house. In court, they chose to remain silent. It didn't matter anymore. The legal verdict was only part of it. What I really needed were boundaries. The forum at the support center took place on a Saturday afternoon. I wore a simple white blouse and tied my hair back. No headset microphone, no stage lights. Just a circle of wooden chairs, a group of maybe a dozen women. Some young, some older than me, all with that same look in their eyes, quiet and knowing. I began speaking in a soft, slow voice, not out of fear but because I knew each word was touching an old scar. I talked about Ruby. About the time I watched her draw me lying on the floor. About how I had felt like the most helpless mother in the world. Then I went on. About the house, the documents I found, the moment the police stood at our door and I said, "They're not allowed in here anymore." When I stopped, someone cried. Someone else nodded slowly. A woman in her 50s squeezed my hand and said, "Thank you. Now I know I can walk away too." I left the hall as dusk settled. In my hand was a scrap of paper hastily written by another single mom. "If you ever start a support group, please let me join. I don't want to stay silent anymore." I tucked the paper into my pocket, my heart light, the same way it had felt the first time I stepped out of that old house. That morning when I woke up, sunlight was already slipping through the curtains, casting soft golden streaks across the ceiling. The room was perfectly still. No hurried footsteps, no clinking dishes, no sharp-toned whispers disguised as concern. Just Ruby's soft giggles coming from the other room, like a soundtrack I could listen to forever. Today was her 8th birthday. I stepped into the kitchen, set the kettle on the stove, then checked the cake I'd made the night before. A small chocolate-covered cake with purple icing flowers, Ruby's favorite. I didn't have the means for anything extravagant, but I knew exactly what she needed. Not a big party. Not expensive gifts. She needed a day where she felt safe, loved, and seen. When Ruby woke up, she ran out in the blue dress I had laid out the night before. Her soft curls were tousled, her eyes still sleepy, but her smile was bright as sunrise. "Mom, I'm 8 today." I opened my arms and pulled her into a tight hug. "You are. I can't believe my little girl is already so big." Ruby sat at the table waiting for me to pour her milk and cut the cake. But instead of eating right away, she pulled a folded sheet of paper from behind her back, tucked into one of her school books. She placed it on the table and slid it toward me. "Look, Mom." I opened it. It was a painting. Watercolors, carefully done, more detailed than her earlier ones. In the center was a small red-roofed house, with 2 people standing hand in hand outside. One tall with long hair, one small with curly hair holding a brown teddy bear. Above them was a blue sky with a round, smiling sun beaming down. In the bottom right corner, in slightly messy handwriting, were the words, "I'm not scared anymore." I froze. I'd saved many of Ruby's drawings, but none had hit me like this. I traced the paper gently, trying to keep my voice even. "What does that mean, sweetie?" Ruby rested her chin on her hand, looking at me with calm, steady eyes. "'Cause you're not scared anymore. So I'm not scared anymore either." I pulled her into a hug. My heart cracked, not from pain but from something nameless. Relief maybe. Or maybe a kind of victory. All those months I had endured in silence, hiding exhaustion, pretending to smile through pain. My daughter had felt it. And now she was healing too. I whispered into her ear, "No one will ever make us scared again. I promise." Ruby nodded, hugging me tighter. That afternoon, the two of us walked hand in hand to the park. Ruby rode her bike along the path, turning back every now and then to shout, "Look at me, Mom. I'm doing it." I sat on a bench, one hand wrapped around a warm paper cup of coffee, the other waving back. The breeze rustled through the trees, kids laughed on the swings, everything felt so peacefully ordinary. As the sun began to slip behind the trees, the two of us headed home. Ruby took a warm bath, then curled up with Marshmallow by the window reading a book. I cleaned the kitchen, folded the light blanket, and packed her bag for the next day. Each task was quiet and steady, but no longer weighed down by exhaustion. It felt like I was actually living each moment, not just surviving but savoring. Before bedtime, Ruby tugged on my sleeve and pointed to the refrigerator, where I had pinned her morning drawing. "Mom, I'm gonna keep working on it tomorrow, okay? I wanna add some flowers, a dog, and the bench you always sit on." I nodded, gently brushing her hair. "Of course. Our home needs more beautiful memories." She crawled under the blanket, burying her face in the pillow. I turned off the main light, leaving only the small bedside lamp casting a warm yellow glow on the wall. I sat beside her, quietly watching her fall asleep. The night passed peacefully. Early the next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. It wasn't quite light yet, just a soft blush on the eastern sky. I slipped on a light robe and stepped out onto our little balcony, inhaling the crisp morning air. Below, the lavender bushes swayed gently in the breeze. The first rays of sunlight broke through the window pane, landing on my arm, slowly warming my skin. I leaned my forehead against the doorframe and exhaled slowly. No more shouting voices. No more texts demanding money. No more suspicious looks, unspoken judgment, or furrowed brows that once made me feel like a burden. I stood there for a long moment, then whispered softly, to myself, to Ruby sleeping in the room behind me, and maybe to Grandpa, who I believed still watched over us from somewhere far away. "We're finally free. And we're never going back." My story might be similar to someone else's out there. A woman who lived too long in silence, who once thought that keeping the peace meant swallowing her pain. But one day I realized that love cannot exist when it's built on fear and wounds. What about you? Have you ever felt trapped in a family dynamic that made you forget who you are? Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes a single honest voice can help someone else feel less alone on their journey. If this story touched something deep within you, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. In the coming days, I'll continue sharing real, heartfelt stories about life, family, and healing, not just mine but also those of mothers, daughters, and women who found the strength to rise from what once felt impossible. See you in the next story.